Chapter 7 London 2001 Chester Square is situated in the heart of Belgravia, behind Eaton Square and just off fashionable Elizabeth Street. Its classic, white stucco-fronted houses are arranged around a charming, private garden. In the corner of the square, St. Mark's Church nestles serenely beneath a large horse chestnut tree, its ancient brass bells pealing on the hour, conveniently saving the square's residents the trouble of glancing at their Patek Philippe watches. From the street, the homes on Chester Square look large and comfortable. They aren't. They are enormous and utterly palatial. It's an oft-repeated cliché in Belgravia that no Englishman could afford to live in Chester Square. Like most clichés, it is true. Roman Abramovich, the Russian oligarch owner of Chelsea Football Club, owned a house there, before he ran off with his young mistress and left the property to his wife. Over the years, Mrs. Abramovich's neighbors included two Hollywood film stars, a French soccer hero, the Swiss founder of Europe's largest hedge fund, a Greek prince and an Indian software tycoon. The rest of the houses on the square were owned, without exception, by American investment bankers. Until the day that one of those American investment bankers, distraught over the collapse of his investments, put a rare Bersa Thunder pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. His heirs sold the house to a British baronet. And so it was that Sir Piers Henley became the first Englishman to own a house in Chester Square for over 25 years. He was also the first person to be murdered there. Detective Inspector Willard Drew of Scotland Yard handed the woman a cup of sweet tea and tried not to stare at her full, sensual lips as she sipped the steaming cup. Beneath her half-open bathrobe, blood splatters were still clearly visible on her pale, lightly freckled thighs. The rape had been particularly violent. But not as violent as the murder. While Inspector Drew interviewed the woman downstairs, up in the bedroom his men were scraping her husband's brain tissue out of the Persian carpet. The master bedroom walls looked like a freshly painted Jackson Pollock. An explosion of blood, of rage, of animal madness had taken place in that room, the likes of which Detective Inspector Drew had never seen before. There was only one word for it: carnage. Inspector Drew said, "We can do this later, ma'am, if it's too much for you right now. Perhaps when you've recovered from the shock." "I will never recover, Inspector. We'd better do it now." She looked directly at him when she spoke, which Inspector Drew found disconcerting. Beautiful was the wrong word for this petite redhead. She was sexy. Painfully sexy. She was creamy skin and velvet softness and quivering, vulnerable femininity, every inch a lady. The only incongruous note about her was her voice. Beneath her $400 fete bathrobe, this woman was cooked nigh to the bone. Inspector Drew said, "If you're sure you're up to it, we could start by verifying some basic details." "I'm up to it." "The deceased's full name?" Lady Tracy Henley took a deep breath. "Piers William Arthur Gunning Henley." Piers William Arthur Gunning Henley, the only son of the late Sir Reginald Henley, baronet, was born into modest, landed wealth. By his 30th birthday, he was one of the richest men in England. Never particularly successful at school, his housemaster at Eton had accurately described him as a charming time-waster. Piers had an instinctive gift for business. In particular, he possessed that rare alchemy that enabled him to sense exactly when a struggling company was at its nadir, if it would bounce back, when, and how far. He bought his first failing business, a small provincial brokerage in Norfolk, at the age of 22. Everybody, including his father, thought he was crazy. When Piers sold the business 6 years later, they had offices in London, Manchester, Edinburgh and Paris and had reported pre-tax profits for that year of £28 million. It was a small success for Piers Henley, but an important one. It taught him to trust his instincts. It also increased his appetite for risk. Calculated risk. Over the next 35 years, Piers bought and sold more than 15 businesses and held on to two: his hedge fund, Henley Investments, and Yasops, a chain of high-end jewelers whose brand Piers had totally revitalized till they were outperforming the likes of Esprit and Graf. He also acquired, and later divested himself of, a wife, Caroline, and 2 children: a daughter, Anna, with his wife, and a son, Sebastian, with his mistress. Both children and their respective mothers were provided with comfortable homes and generous allowances. But Piers had neither the time nor the inclination to pursue a family life. Nor was he remotely interested in conventional notions of romance. At least not until his 60th birthday, when a chance encounter with a young woman named Tracy Stone changed his life forever. For his birthday party, Sir Piers had inherited the baronetcy a month before on his father's death, hired a private room at the Groucho Club in Soho. A mecca for London's successful media and literary types, the Groucho was exclusive, but nevertheless managed to maintain a sort of threadbare, scruffy Englishness that Piers had always rather relished. It reminded him of his childhood, of the down-at-heel grandeur of Kingham Hall, the Henley family estate, where constables and turners hung on the walls but the heating was never switched on and all the carpets were riddled with moth holes. Sir Piers Henley approved of the venue, but was depressed by the guest list. His secretary, Janie, had drawn it up as usual. Looking around at the same old faces, captains of industry and finance, accompanied either by their frozen-faced first wives or beautiful but grasping second wives, Piers thought bleakly, when did everybody get so old? So dull. When exactly had he exchanged his real friendships for this? Contacts and business acquaintances. It was while he was pondering this important question that the waitress poured scalding lobster bisque directly onto his crotch. To the end of his life, Sir Piers Henley would have livid burn marks on the inside of his thighs. Every time he looked at them, he thanked his lucky stars. The Groucho party had been Tracy Stone's first day as a waitress, and here last. As Sir Piers Henley screamed and leapt to his feet, Tracy dropped to her knees, unbuckled his belt and pulled off his trousers faster than a whore on commission. Then, without so much as my lord, she whipped off his ypsilon and emptied a jug of ice water over the baronet's exposed genitalia. The cool water felt marvelous. The fact that he was standing in the middle of the Groucho Club in front of half of London society stark bollock naked felt even more marvelous. Despite the searing pain in his legs and balls, Sir Piers Henley realized he felt more alive in those few moments than he had in the last 15 years put together. Here he was, praying for a return of youth, of life, of excitement, and poof, a beautiful girl had dropped into his lap. Or rather, a beautiful girl had dropped lava-hot soup into his lap, but why split hairs? He couldn't have been more delighted. Tracy Stone was in her late 20s, with short, spiky red hair, dark brown eyes and a skinny, boyish figure that looked quite preposterously sexy in her black and white maid's get-up. She's like a human matchstick, thought Piers, sent to light me up. And light him up Tracy did. When Tracy agreed to go on a date with Piers, her friends thought she was crazy. Has about 109 trays. And posh. With a cock like a burnt cocktail sausage thanks to you. It's disgusting. Piers' friends were equally scandalized. She's younger than your daughter, old boy. She's a waitress, Piers. And not even a good one. She'll rob you blind. Neither of them listened. Tracy and Piers knew their friends were wrong. Tracy wasn't interested in Piers' money. And Piers couldn't have cared less if Tracy's parents were as cockney as Bobels. She had switched on a part of him that he had believed long dead. As the burns on his groin slowly began to heal, all he could think about was going to bed with her. On their first date, Piers took Tracy to dinner at the Ivy. They roared with laughter through 3 delicious courses, but afterward Tracy hopped into a black cab before Piers could so much as give her a peck on the cheek. On the second date, they went to the theater. It was a mistake. Tracy was bored. Piers was bored. Another cab was hailed and Piers thought, I've lost her. The next morning at 7 a.m., the doorbell rang at Piers' flat on Cadogan Gardens. It was Tracy. She was carrying a suitcase. I need to ask you something, she said bluntly. Are you gay? Piers rubbed his eyes blearily. Am I? What? No. I'm not gay. Why on earth would you think I was gay? You like the theater. Piers laughed loudly. That's it. That's your evidence? That and the fact you never tried to shag me. Piers looked at her incredulously. Never try. Good God, woman. You never let me within a mile of you. And by the way, for what it's worth, I don't like the theater. Why'd you go there then? I was trying to impress you. It didn't work. Yes, I noticed. Tracy, my darling, I would like nothing more than to try to shag you, as you so poetically put it. But you've never given me the chance. Pushing past him into the hall, Tracy dropped her suitcase and closed the door behind her. I'm giving you the chance now. The lovemaking was like nothing Pierce had ever experienced. Tracy was silken hair and soft flesh and pillowy breasts and wet, warm, delicious depths that craved him like no woman had ever craved him before. When it was over, he proposed to her immediately. Tracy left. "Don't be so tosser. I ain't the marrying kind." "Nor am I," said Pierce truthfully. "Then why'd you ask me? You must stop asking me to do things that you don't even enjoy yourself. It's a bad habit. I asked because I want you. And I always get what I want." "Ha! Is that a fact?" "Well, not this time, your lordship," said Tracy defiantly. "I ain't interested." Pierce couldn't have loved her more if she'd been dipped in platinum. They married 6 weeks later. The first 18 months of the Henleys' marriage were blissfully happy. Pierce went about his business as usual, and Tracy never complained about his long hours, or his habit of taking telephone calls in the middle of dinner, the way that other women had had. Pierce had no idea how his wife occupied her time during the days. At first had assumed she went shopping, but as the monthly Amex statements rolled in he saw that Tracy had spent almost nothing, despite having an unlimited platinum card and a generous cash allowance. Once had asked her, "What do you do when I'm at the office?" "I make porn films, Pierce," she replied, deadpan. "That's Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Tuesdays, armed robbery. Thursdays me day off." Pierce grinned and thought, "I'm the luckiest man on earth." He carried her up to bed. Tracy was the perfect sexual partner, always eager, always inventive, never demanding on the nights when he was too tired or stressed with work to screw her. The only cloud on the marital horizon was the fact that, according to Tracy, she could not have children. "Nothing doing in that department, I'm afraid. Me equipment's broken," she told him matter-of-factly. "Well, what part of your equipment?" "I dunno. All of it, I expect." "Why? Aren't you a bit old to be thinking about changing nappies, Loof?" Pierce left. "I won't be changing them. Besides, you're not old. Don't you want a child of your own?" Tracy didn't. But no amount of her repeating this message would make her husband believe her. Over the next year, Pierce dragged his young wife to every fertility specialist on Harley Street, subjecting her to round after round of IVF, all to no avail. Determined to think positive, he bought a large family house in Belgravia and hired an interior decorator from Paris to design children's rooms, one for a boy, one for a girl and one in neutral yellow. "What's that for? In case I give birth to a rabbit or so mink?" Tracy teased him. She remembered what had said to her the night he proposed. "I always get everything I want." Unfortunately, it seemed that in Mother Nature, Sir Piers Henley had met his match. "Your children." Detective Inspector Willard Drew tore his eyes away from Tracy's breasts, enticingly encased in a peach lace La Perla bra. For such a slender woman, Lady Henley was remarkably well endowed and she did seem to be having enormous trouble keeping her bathrobe belted. "They're away for the night?" Her beautiful face clouded over. "We don't have kids." "It was me. I couldn't." Inspector Drew blushed. "Oh. I'm sorry. I saw the bedrooms upstairs and I assumed." Tracy shrugged. "That's all right. Why wouldn't you assume? Was there any other questions?" "Just one." She'd already been incredibly helpful, giving detailed descriptions of the stolen items of jewelry. Lady Henley knew a lot about jewelry, settings, carats, clarity, you name it, minus, as well as of her attacker. He was masked at the time of the attack, so she never saw his face, but she described him as being of strong build, stocky, with a scar on the back of his left hand, a deep voice, and a strange accent she couldn't quite place. Considering the ordeal she'd just been through, it was a lot to remember. She was certain she'd never met him before. "This might be difficult," Inspector Drew said gently, "but did your husband have any enemies? Anyone who might have borne a grudge toward him?" Tracy laughed, a full, raucous, barmaid's laugh, and Inspector Drew thought what fun she must have been to be married to. A few hours ago Sir Piers Henley must have considered himself one of the happiest men alive. Only a few thousand. "My husband had more enemies than Hitler, Inspector." Inspector Drew frowned. "How so?" "Piers was a rich man. Self-made. In the hedge fund business, wasn't he? Nobody likes a head guy. Not the blockers who do up their kitchens, not their partners, not their competitors, not even their investors half the bloody time, no matter how much money you make them. It's a dog-eat-dog world, Inspector, and my Pierce was a fuck-off Doberman with a mean set of teeth. Tracy Henley said this with pride. People hated him. And that's just his font. If you want to get into the personal stuff, there's the blogger he gesammt to buy this place, the car dealer he never paid for the Aston cause he didn't like the way he looked at me, everyone he blackballed at Whites, that's a long list, I can tell you. Then does his ex-wife, his ex-mistress. His current mistress, for all I know. Inspector Drew found the idea that any man married to Tracy Henley would seek sexual pleasure elsewhere extremely hard to believe. According to her statement, she was 32 but she looked a decade younger. Pierce had an army of enemies, Tracy continued. But he only had one real friend. Oh. And who was that? Me. For the first time that night, Tracy Henley gave way to tears.